Hey everyone! Bullying in the workplace doesn't always break the law, but it always breaks down trust, morale, and productivity. In this episode of the HR Investigations podcast, I'll walk you through how to investigate bullying allegations with fairness and confidence, from intake to findings. Tune in and learn how to handle these tough cases the right way.
Welcome to the HR Investigations podcast, exploring the issues, challenges, strategies, and solutions. Sponsored by RPCHR and hosted by Natalie Ivey, an HR consultant, licensed PI, and author of the best-selling book, How to Conduct Internal Investigations, a practical guide for human resource professionals. And now, here's Natalie.
Hey everybody, welcome to the HR Investigations podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Ivey. Today, we're diving into a subject that many HR professionals struggle with: bullying in the workplace. Unlike harassment or discrimination that have very specific legal definitions, bullying often really falls into this gray area. It can be very subjective, it can be hard to define, and yet the damage it causes to employees, teams, organizations is very, very real. In this episode, I'm going to walk you through how to approach investigations into bullying allegations, and we're going to talk about what bullying looks like, how to structure your investigation process, and how to reach fair and defensible findings. My goal in this episode is to give you some practical steps you can use the next time an employee walks into your office or picks up the phone and calls the hotline with a bullying complaint. All right, let's get started. When employees are complaining about bullying, they're usually talking about behavior, and they sometimes even have a hard time describing it. But generally, it's intimidating, people who are kind of hostile, kind of rude or undermining. That means maybe they will articulate things like verbal abuse, a supervisor who is overly critical, gossiping, possibly being excluded from some team activities, or maybe even kind of subtle forms of sabotage, like a coworker who is purposely withholding important information maybe needed for a project. Well, here's the tricky part, though. Unlike harassment, harassment, it really requires a link to a protected characteristic like race, sex, religion, right? Bullying doesn't always rise to the level of something that is unlawful, but just because it isn't illegal and a violation of like Title VII or the ADA or whatever, it doesn't mean we just can ignore it, because that behavior is certainly not in line with organizational values or hopefully policies. And if you leave it unaddressed, then bullying really does drive down morale. And I can personally tell you, because I've had a client that we had to do a little damage control, it was driving a lot of their turnover, right? And also, it can lead to claims of constructive discharge, which means when a situation becomes so intolerable, any reasonable person would have to walk out the door, right? So let's talk about the first step, intake. When you have an employee who reports bullying, just like any other allegations in intake, your job is to listen carefully, and you need to begin documenting what they share. But don't go and just be kind of dismissive and like, oh, wow, that just really sounds like you're having a personality conflict with Stephanie, your coworker, or you're having a personality conflict, with your boss, Jared. No, okay, you can't go there. When you are in a role of handling that intake, you have to be neutral in your dealings with these folks and put your own biases aside. What you've got to do is be asking some really important questions like, well, tell me, when exactly did this behavior start? Tell me, how often has this happened? Who else was around? How has this impacted you at work? Give me specific examples, okay? From there, you then want to really talk about what other interim measures might be necessary. Some of you, it may be that the allegations have some rather serious tones to them. And this may be where, okay, if these folks work together, the accused bully, all right, aka the subject in the investigation, and your complainant, if they work really closely together, you may need to temporarily separate them. You might have to adjust even reporting structures, or, really what you're doing is minimizing the risk that retaliation is going to happen while you're actually looking into this and conducting an investigation. So now, planning the investigation. All right, you're going to have to really get a game plan together, and this is one of the things I talk about in my workshop all the time. You cannot just go with a notepad and fly by the seat of your pants and just start winging it and calling people in and asking them their opinion on what they think is going on. Okay, that is not an investigation. You've got to really identify who needs to be interviewed, and that means, of course, the complainant, and you would have done a formal intake. You're definitely going to need to identify witnesses who may have observed this type of behavior, get the who, what, where, when, why, right? And then, of course, the person who is accused of the behavior, the subject. All right, when you're interviewing the complainant, the important thing is also getting a timeline of events, all right? I really hammer in my workshops, getting dates, times, and details. They've got to share specific incidents. And a lot of times when you ask people to you say to them, well, tell me what's going on. Well, she's always really mean to me, or she always really talks down to me, or things like that. That's very vague, okay? The more detail you have, the stronger your investigation will be. Then, of course, when you've moved along and you're getting to the point where you're interviewing the person accused, the subject, remember, they are also entitled to fairness and respect. All right, just because a complainant comes in and make these allegations, it doesn't necessarily mean that your investigation will ultimately substantiate them. Right? Sometimes we do have complainants that make bad faith complaints. You do need to share the allegations in enough detail so that the subject can certainly respond meaningfully, give them an opportunity to share their side of the story. And then when interviewing witnesses, you want to keep your questions neutral. All right. What you don't want to do is say, have you seen Jared bully Allison? Don't go and kind of create a leading question like that. No. What you want to say is, can you please describe the interactions between these two individuals? You might even say, can you please describe for me anything that you might feel has been perhaps out of the ordinary lately? And again, you're on a little bit of a fishing expedition, but neutral phrasing really minimizes the bias and it maintains the integrity of your case. And then once you've really gathered enough information, it's time to then analyze the evidence. And with bullying cases, you're really looking a lot of times for patterns of behavior. All right, is this a repeated issue or just an isolated incident? Credibility is key. Are the accounts really consistent? Do you have multiple witnesses that are corroborating the complainant's story? Okay, does the subject have any sort of motive, to deny or kind of really minimize their action steps? All right, document all of it in your investigation notes, and then certainly at the end of the day, your findings need to be based on facts, not assumptions. You want to write things down in clear, objective documentation, right? And things that are going to stand up to legal scrutiny, if this thing maybe goes a little bit farther down the road and you're in litigation. Now, after you've reached your findings, you're then going to have to make recommendations. And depending on the severity, the impact, recommendations could be anything from coaching or mediation with maybe the subject, if you did substantiate that there are some behaviors that are in violation of your organization's policy. It could even be very formal disciplinary action or termination in extreme circumstances. But remember, the process isn't really over once you then issue, let's say, a disciplinary action to the subject. You've really got to follow up then after the fact, right? This is I'll tell you, a lot of organizations just miss the step. You think, oh, wow, the work is done. We issued a write-up to the subject. Well, what now? Okay. You've really got to circle back with the complainant. You have to let them know, hey, we took this very seriously. We've conducted an investigation and we have addressed the situation. A lot of times they're going to say, well, what's going to happen? Is so-and-so going to be fired? I would not suggest you go there and really share those details, not unless there is a real strong reason that legal is giving you to do so. But generally, we are not really going to share those details. We may just simply say that the matter has been addressed, but we are not at liberty to discuss the details. You do want to say that the organization takes these kinds of allegations seriously, and when we find that perhaps there has been a violation of policy, we do take swift and appropriate action to address it. Something like that. If you do speak with your counsel and based on the circumstances, they feel that it is important for you to share exactly what sanctions, if you will, may be taken against the subject, fine. But I would say that's a relatively small percentage of cases where you would want to do that. So bullying, it may not always be unlawful, like sexual harassment or something, but it is always harmful to individuals, organizations, and as HR professionals, ethics professionals, employee relations, whatever your role may be, right? We have a responsibility to respond quickly, investigate thoroughly, and also take very fair and consistent action. Now, with that said, I also want to just point out in a previous episode, I also discussed bullying, and there I discussed some key points in bullying policy, right? So this is kind of a follow-up, if you will, episode to that one. That was a while back. I don't know the episode number off the top of my head, but you can find it in my podcast episode list. But if you really don't have a bullying policy right now, I would certainly recommend you check out that episode. Every organization today really needs to have very strong codes of conduct and really be able to define exactly what bullying is. If you don't, then you're going to have a very difficult time when you conduct an investigation on determining whether someone's behavior really did cross the line. Okay. It's kind of like putting football players on the field without really having any boundary lines. How do you know where the end zone is, and how do you know what is out of bounds or not? Now, I want to thank you for listening to today's episode of the HR Investigations Podcast. If you found it helpful, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you'd like more resources, you can check out my book, How to Conduct Internal Investigations. It comes with a very comprehensive supplemental toolkit with a lot of freebies in there and interview templates and documentation, all that kind of stuff. And don't forget, you need to register for my upcoming virtual class. It's coming up on November 12th and 13th. How to Conduct Internal Investigations, a practical workshop for HR professionals. It's worth 10 HRCI and SHRM credits, and you'll earn a certified HR investigator digital badge for all your socials. And if you register right now, you can take advantage of the Premier Access discount and save $100 off registration and get a free copy of my new book. Just go to rpchr.com/events, and the link is also in today's show notes. And by the way, this is my last virtual workshop in 2025. So if you need to level up your skills and check off an accomplishment on your professional development plan, you need to act now because seats are limited, and I know they're going to go. They always do with my final one of the year. All right, I'm Natalie Ivey, and I will see you next time. And always remember, the best investigation is the one you don't have to do.
Thanks for joining us today on the HR Investigations Podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share the show with any colleagues who will benefit from our strategies and solutions. For free bonus resources, simply visit hr-investigations.com. And remember, if you'd like some help with improving your investigative skills, or if your organization is in need of an external investigator to help with a case, please get in touch with us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.